Let's bring in Pulitzer Prize-winning opinion columnist for the New York Times, Maureen Dowd. She is the author of the new book entitled Notorious: Portraits of Stars from Hollywood, Culture, Fashion, and Tech. An essay collection of her style features for various publications. And it is great to have you back on the show, Maureen.
It's incredible to have you on the show, Maureen. And we're gonna get to the book in 1 second. You have written, though, obviously, about the showdown between Donald Trump and Zelensky. Curious your thoughts as we go towards peace talks, possible peace talks, or possible capitulation in Saudi Arabia this morning.
Yeah, I was nauseated by that scene in the Oval Office. It actually made me sort of queasy to see the president and J.D. Vance treating Zelensky like a busboy. It was unworthy of America.
Yeah, and you've obviously covered a lot of administrations. You covered also wrote about the first Trump administration. How does a second Trump administration 1 month in compare to the first Trump administration? What are the similarities? What are the differences?
Well, I always used to think the thing that saved us with Trump was that he was not a hawk. He did not have those tendencies. He always acted like any, war was a distraction from, you could be doing business. You could be opening an oceanfront hotel, in North Korea. Why are we having all this? But now he has turned into some wild imperialist where he's grabbing Greenland and Canada and D.C. and Kennedy Center. And, that's a different situation. And also Trump in combination with the tech guys who, as Kara Swisher wrote in The Atlantic this week, they decided their digital world was not enough for them. They want to take over the real government. And that combination is very dangerous, I think.
Well, perfect segue. Speaking of the tech guys, Maureen, the book features a 2017 Vanity Fair profile that you wrote on Elon Musk, who discussed his then tepid relationship with President Donald Trump. And you write in part this: with Trump now president, Musk finds himself walking a fine line. His companies count on the U.S. government for business and subsidies, regardless of whether Marcus Aurelius or Caligula is in charge. Musk's companies joined the amicus brief against Trump's executive order regarding immigration and refugees, and Musk himself tweeted against the order. At the same tune, unlike Uber's Travis Kalanick, Musk has hung in there as a member of Trump's Strategic and Policy Forum. I asked Musk about the flack he had gotten for associating with Trump. In the photograph of tech executives with Trump, he had looked gloomy, and there was a weary tone in his voice when he talked about the subject. In the end, he said it's better to have voices of moderation in the room with the president. There are a lot of people, kind of the hard left, who essentially want to isolate and not have any voice. Very unwise. Again, that was back in 2017. So looking now at the relationship with Musk.
Yeah, given your time with him and the profile that you wrote, what insights does it give you on the Elon Musk that you've seen since he was jumping around on stage in Pennsylvania in the final weeks of the campaign?
Well, there's another profile in the book of Peter Thiel. And back in 2019, and Peter Thiel then was a pariah in Silicon Valley because he had spoken at Trump's 2016 convention. And all the other Silicon Valley guys were Democrats. So that tells you how far we've come. And Peter Thiel predicted that Elon Musk and Trump would start getting along because Elon Musk was kind of like the sci-fi P.T. Barnum, and Trump is the real P.T. Barnum. So he thought that their larger-than-life personas and their grandmaster salesmanship would draw them together. And I think it will probably keep them together longer than a lot of people think.
Well, and it's a perfect segue for just talking about the book in general, Notorious. You started doing these profiles because you didn't want to just limit yourself to writing in your voice about Washington. You wanted to not only examine Washington leaders, but wanted to examine leaders in Hollywood and in the tech world. And you say that the one thing that they had in common was all of these people had to somehow sort of bend reality fields. Talk about the difference going from Washington to Hollywood to Silicon Valley in covering these people.
Right. Well, I think of Washington and Hollywood and now Silicon Valley as all of them are capitals of illusion, and ratings really are in Silicon Valley clicks. And when I was little, my brother would take me over to American Film Institute at Kennedy Center before it was Trump Kennedy Center. And he would take me to movies like Shane and Singing in the Rain. And I was fascinated with movie stars who had such magnetism. They burned through the screen. And I felt the same way in politics. When I first saw Barack Obama, I got on the road with him for all of 2008 because I am fascinated with people who are super magnetic, super talented, super powerful, and how they use that power or abuse it or squander it. And that's why, I studied Shakespeare in school, and that's what the Shakespearean tragedies and histories are about.
One of those figures that had such an extraordinary cultural impact, and as you say, still does when you travel around the world, you still see her images everywhere. Marilyn Monroe. And
right. She's on the
Jane
cover.
Fonda. Right. But you talked about in your Jane Fonda profile how Monroe walked straight up to Jane Fonda in a meeting where men were literally shaking because they were so nervous she was in the room. But she saw Jane Fonda, who was then young and very insecure, and she was drawn to that insecurity. But you also talked about in your profile of Marilyn Monroe itself, you said, here's a woman who was supposed to be this dumb, ditzy blonde, but she started her own production company. Her image is still one of the most iconic images in the world, one of the most powerful images in the world. And you said what drew people to Marilyn Monroe were her troubles as well, the power and the pain. They collided together to create something that just drew Americans to her.
Yeah, how do you stay famous that long? It's fascinating. When you walk around New York, you still see her picture in cartoons and picture in store windows. And you're right, Joe, it was the vulnerability that bonded people to her. And, they were always posing her with a book as like an inside joke, like, oh, look, the dumb blonde has a book. But she herself had a collection of 300 classic books. She was always striving to be better. And, there's a very sad quote in there, I think it's after her Arthur Miller marriage, where she says, you can't really know people or be in love with people, really. And she's a very sad story.
Yeah, let's talk about Al Pacino.
I saw his picture is out here with Willie.
With Willie, we got a chance. I got a chance to talk to him for after his book came out.
I love that interview. That was such a great interview.
Thank you. The thing that struck me about Al Pacino, and you write about it in your profile of him, is you have a lot of movie stars that go, oh, I'm an actor, I do it just for the acting, and maybe they'll go to Broadway for 3 or 4 days. But with Al Pacino, you realize this guy was crazy about his craft. He was driven to act. He became famous, became a megastar after The Godfather. It created a lot of distractions. But at the end of the day, Maureen, you say it all came down to being an actor. For him, that was his life.
Yes, the title is partly inspired by him because he told me when he got notorious, meaning, famous after The Godfather, there were so many sycophants and women and drugs and alcohol, and he sort of succumbed to all of it. And he said that was a really terrible time. And then he kind of pulled out of it later because he realized the thing he really loved was at risk, his acting. But he's, as you could see, Joe, he's a very interesting guy.
Yeah, he is, and directors that have worked with him have said the same. You also profile Larry David, and I must ask you, and I asked Larry this question on air because he was walking me through his office. I immediately pointed to the private jet, and I said, "Private jet, that's interesting. Whose is that?" Larry didn't want to talk about that, but I saw a collection of Hitler books. I said, "Larry, this is very interesting."
I can explain this.
I said, "Larry, this is very interesting because you are a fighter against anti-Semitism." I said, "And yet you have a large collection of Hitler books." Why? He said, "Maureen always sends me Hitler books, so please explain."
Yeah, well, obviously because he's, a student of anti-Semitism, I sent him books about Hitler to sate his, anti-Semitic studies. But Larry is so funny because if you go out with him in public, like we went to San Vicente Bungalows for dinner one night a couple of years ago, and he's just like he is on the show. He got a drink with a piece of celery in it, and he didn't like that, so then he's agitating for a long time. Then he looks around and throws it in a planter. And then he's obsessing on the fact, will anyone find the piece of celery in the planter?